If you're wanting to make art, but keep getting stuck with overwhelm and procrastination, I'm going to share why this is such a common problem, even for the most experienced artists. The biggest mistake we're making when it comes to starting an art project or starting to make our art, and how to get unstuck immediately, well, after you watch this video. I'll also show you exactly what I do to make art consistently, even when I have no idea what I'm doing, or when life gets in the way and I struggle to keep going, or when, all those voices of self-doubt start chiming in. They say really mean things, don't they? Like, why bother making art anyway? What's the point? Okay, this is going to sound maybe counterintuitive or obvious, but in order to start making art, we have this false assumption that we have to know what we're doing in order to begin. So let me back up and explain what I mean by that. Not knowing what we're doing actually has to do with the mistake that we all make, so I'll get to that in a second. But the problem, let's come back to the problem, is when we don't know how to begin making our art or keep creating consistently, it's because we're lacking a way to develop our creative process in a meaningful and playful and fun way. In other words, a non-threatening way. When you sit down with the intention to make amazing art and you don't know what you're doing, you lack confidence, why wouldn't you freeze or freak out? That's a really natural response to not knowing what you're doing, right? Especially when you're a beginner, when you're starting out. Just think about how awful it feels to want to do something and not be able to do it, or not be able, the results don't match what you have in your mind. Think about how terrible it feels to try to do something and be bad at it, which is where we all are as beginners when we're starting out in our art. And it's really hard to overcome making and looking at our so-called bad art or our amateur attempts, especially in a world where we're, looking at social media and scrolling through all these, amazing people making amazing art, and we're comparing ourselves to them. Of course we'd want to quit, right? But instead of quitting, what we really need is a way of practicing our art, which I'm going to get to in a second, but I want to come back to the mistake. The biggest mistake we're making in this situation is that we're putting our art content, the thing we're trying to make, in front of our art process, the how of making it. So it makes sense, doesn't it? Usually when we start trying to make art, we're starting with art content. So what this means is, like, we're starting, if we're learning how to paint, we start painting on a big canvas or any size canvas. We just start trying to paint a painting. Or if you're a writer, you'll start trying to write your novel, right? That's just how we do things, right? We're starting with the art product. So I think of our art product as like the big idea, this thing we want to make. And then when we have something we want to make, and we're not sure how to do it, what happens is, let me know if in the comments if any of these sound familiar to you, but when we're trying to figure out how to do something or how to begin, we might make some practice attempts, and then we might doubt, well, how do I execute this idea? I'm not sure if I have the mechanics down. So then we might take a bunch of classes. We might go shopping and get more supplies or better supplies because we don't have the exact right thing in order to start creating. I don't know, procrastination takes a lot of interesting forms, but you might decide, like, I just don't have the right place to create, and I've been meaning to clean out that spare room or my garage or clear off my table. But it's such a big ordeal that, you just don't get to it. You're gonna wait, a decade or longer to make space to start your creative project. And so it's normal to kind of go through a lot of different cycles of this when you're starting out and when you don't have your creative process when you don't have a way of looking at your creative process. Other things that we do when we're starting to go back and to look for materials or the right techniques is we start looking at, well, what are other people doing who are doing what I want to do? We start looking at what our other artists' work products are, people who have way more experience than us, who are way more established, and then we start comparing ourselves. And then at this point, the momentum and the desire and the idea to work on your creative project is kind of slowly withering a slow death, because it's just so difficult to want to make something, have an idea, and then be comparing yourself to someone else who's already done it. You might think, oh, someone's already done my idea. It's too late for me. I can't do this. So those critical voices come back in and find a way to stop us. Investing in a lot of art supplies or classes, or having really good intentions and not following through on them, that sucks. That feels really bad. But then, if we're doing this over and over again, we might get into kind of feelings of shame or feelings of guilt that are pretty heavy. Now we're even more overwhelmed by this idea, and usually pretty much everyone quits at this point until such a day where they might try again, much later. And so the result is our creative dreams just start feeling so far away that they seem ridiculous and out of reach. So this is the problem with trying to start your art with content, with trying to make the thing. Even experienced artists can get massively stuck with this when they're starting a new project. Every time I besides painting, I also write books. And every time I'm starting a new book project, it's like everything I knew before kind of goes out the window and I have to start from scratch. The same thing is when I'm starting a new painting series and I'm trying different mediums or I'm trying different subject matter. It's almost like starting all over again. And so, believe me, I'm speaking from experience. The reason I know this struggle so well is because I've lived it. And it's the thing I really like helping people the most with. So what I'm sharing with you here and what I'm going to show you in a couple seconds is not just what works for me, but I've actually worked with thousands of students over many, many years. I'm going to say decades. Yeah, I'm old. So it's something I really love to help people with, and it's very easy. The solution is to start with your creative process, not starting with the creative product. So, usually start with product, we put that first, but we're going to reverse it and start with process. This is what I call your creative practice, and I'm going to actually show you behind the scenes what my creative practice looks like in just a sec. So, but let me first just explain a little bit what I mean by creative practice. It doesn't mean, boring exercises where you're trying to perfect your technique. Your creative practice is meant to be this very fun, engaging, enjoyable way to play with simple art supplies, simple tools, kind of like think about the kind of art supplies kids use, so that you can establish a rhythm of creating for fun and for pleasure, because when we're having fun, we want to do more of this. So when you have a creative practice, then you have a very easy way to begin and keep going. So instead of starting with your art content, the stuff you're making, you start with your creative practice, the way you make your art. So once you understand the difference between these two things, there's a difference between making an art product and there's a difference between having a creative practice. So every artist needs both of these, and once you know, and you kind of can never go back and you're like, oh my gosh, this is what's been missing my whole life. We need a creative practice in order to make our art products. Our art products are going to be a natural result of having a creative practice that we're doing regularly. And here is a side note. Your creative practice can even become your art. And if you're curious what that would look like or what I mean by that, or want to know about examples or have more questions, drop me a note in the comments, because that's a whole nother subject. I don't want to get off on a tangent. The way you can consistently make art is by having a creative practice. This is how you practice your art and how you document your creative process as you go. The way you will be able to consistently make art, including beginning over and over again. I really feel like this whole idea of beginning is just something we have to face every day. So if we have a built-in way to do that, we have this creative practice, that's how we begin. It makes beginning so easy, and then we can just keep going, right? Let me show you what I mean by all this. We'll pop over into my studio and I'm going to show you exactly what my creative practice looks like and how you can get started right away. Welcome to my art studio, where I have a big stack of my sketchbooks to show you. And this is the #1 ingredient that you'll need for a creative practice, at least how I do it and how I teach it, is it all happens inside of a blank artist's sketchbook. This first sketchbook I want to show you is my daily diary. It's not really an artist sketchbook. I've made other videos about this here on my YouTube channel, but I just love documenting life through visual art and things I'm thinking about, the things of everyday life. So this is a huge part of my creative practice. I'm always drawing my dogs. Draw what you love, even if you don't think you can draw it. So yeah, lots of notes. When I'm on Zoom calls, I'll sketch people. So none of this really makes sense to other people. It's just really for my eyes only. So I've even got breakthroughs in here about my creative practice that I'm documenting. So yeah, there's tons of writing, documentation of different trips I'm taking. I just like to sketch and draw along my way and fill these year after year, kind of keeping track of what's happening. Another gathering of friends. This one was in person, kind of a geeky thing I do, but love to draw people and write down snippets of overheard conversation and kind of juxtapose those. So this is part of my creative practice. And as I mentioned, I also paint. So I keep painting, I keep sketchbooks in the studio, or if I'm going out to paint, or if I'm teaching a painting workshop somewhere, I take sketchbooks with me. But the sketchbook here, remember I said, instead of working on a canvas or trying to make some big important painting, it's helpful to have a way of practicing in a non-threatening way. And so, you know, this is just paper. We can always get more paper, we can always get more sketchbooks. So this is where I will experiment with different media, experiment with different techniques, just play. It is so fun and so satisfying just to have a way to play. And I use paint, writing, collage, my photographs. It all goes. It's always different. Every sketchbook is completely different depending on what I'm working on. Here's a larger one. So the sketchbooks, you can get whatever size kind of fits your life. And these aren't usually things I show to people. I only show people in my classes, and now I'm showing them on YouTube because I'm trying to, you know, help people understand what having a creative practice is. So, you know, it's all about experiments and keeping track of your artistic journey. And just as I mentioned before, it's a lot of fun, it's a lot of play. This is where I'm practicing my painting and drawing and just trying to be loose and goofy. You know, these drawings of animals are very childlike, and that's where I like to start. So, more dogs. It's such a delight, and it's like I don't have to know what I'm doing in order to make these, trust me. Let me show you some other examples real quick. And as I mentioned, I've got many more detailed tutorials in my YouTube channel here. Also online classes if you ever want to dive deep and take a class, it'd be super fun. So this sketchbook, you can see how thick it is. They just end up getting chunky, especially when you're pasting a lot of things in. Instead of having file cabinets or files, I have sketchbooks, and I just glue things in that inspire me. Lots of writing. If there's a magazine article I like, I just cut it out and paste it in. More painting practice, ideas, thoughts, experiments. This is what goes into your creative practice. So my books get really big. I end up making all these flaps so I can hide my writing or add more kind of secret treasures and compartments inside. And this makes it all so much fun. Let's see. There's another one. This one's from quite a while ago, 2011, I think. So really, I feel like this is soul work too. It's not just about making art. I started out working as an art therapist and taught people how to have a creative practice. Making their visual journal was, very much more helpful than just having it filled with words. Also, other topics I discuss in other videos. I'm kind of getting on a tangent here. But my background is in art therapy, and making these type of creative practice sketchbooks is just what made me feel better as a kid. And then I kept doing it. And then when I was working as an art therapist, started doing it with my patients. That was the first time I really started teaching these techniques to other people. So it's very intuitive, it can be very abstract, and it is just a plain fun way to document your experience of life and your creative practice. This is really essential for anyone who wants to be making art. You need a way to capture ideas and document your process. And speaking of that, this is my latest book. And this came about because of having a creative practice. It's called 100 Portraits in 100 Days, a quarantine diary. These are paintings I painted in the pandemic and I made essays every day that kind of documented my experience in the early days of the pandemic. I was in solo quarantine. This one's called Working from Home. And so I have some of the originals here. Let's see. These are made on my old sketchbook pages. So I just cut up some old sketchbooks that had a ton of writing in them and painted over both sides of the page. And then these became just my canvases. Like, I just really felt like cutting things up. I explain it all in the book, why I did this the way I did it. But it was so satisfying, and I wouldn't have this whole entire body of work unless I had a creative practice. So you never know where this is going to take you, but this is just an example of one of the creative projects I've done as a result. It's a creative product that came after having the creative practice. So now that you know the importance of having a creative practice and a little bit what it looks like, this next video will show you a really simple art supply setup that fits in a shoebox that you can use on the couch or at your kitchen table. No art studio needed, so that you can start creating right away.